Let me begin by reading a passage that we've already looked at, but this one is very appropriate to what we're going to be studying this evening with regard to courtship, because it reminds us of what it is we are seeking to achieve and what we're trying to avoid, and that would be in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 18. And there Paul writes this: "Do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, just as God said, 'I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord, and do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you. And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty." Let's begin. I think we've already prayed, haven't we? So let's begin with a review of what we've been looking at, and I'll just quickly try to review everything we've seen up to this point. First thing we started with is, what is marriage? And marriage, as you know, is a covenant of companionship. It's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. We also saw that it was the most important decision that we can make in life, realizing that conversion is not really a decision, although it is once we have been converted, to trust in Jesus. But that decision of a lifelong partner, a lifelong spouse, companion for life is very important. As you know, a good marriage can be a great blessing. A bad marriage can be a great hardship. Why get married? We saw, well, of course, for companionship. Also, the Lord desires godly offspring, and He desires for us to keep ourselves pure. And oftentimes it is the case that in order to do that, we need to get married. Who may marry? One man and one woman. Polygamy is condemned in Scripture. So is homosexuality, not two men or two women. It has to be a man and a woman who are eligible to marry one another, which means they may not be bound to another. That even refers to engagement, because engagement is tantamount, as we're going to see again if we get that far this evening, to marriage. Of course, they must not be married, and if they have ever been married, they must have a biblical divorce. If either one is a believer, then they both must be believers. And then finally, to be eligible to be married, there must be parental consent. Again, realizing that marriage lasts for as long as life lasts, unless it's broken by desertion or adultery. And that marriage is only for this life and not for the life to come. Now, last time we looked at different methods in different cultures and in history as to how these unions are actually brought about. We have a list on the board of some of those ways: arranged marriages, matchmakers in some community, the law of the Levirate, which is where the brother would actually marry his deceased brother's widow and raise up a seed to him. The firstborn would be theirs. Sometimes within families, certain marriages take place, political marriages to create perhaps a covenant or some type of a treaty or union between two countries. The master-slave relationship that we saw in Scripture last time, sometimes some of the kings like Saul would give a daughter away as a reward for, I think in the case of David, he was trying to get him killed, but offered his daughter as a reward to the person who would kill 100 Philistines. And then, of course, in our culture, there is dating. And what we're looking at is courtship as an alternative to dating, which we believe to be a much more God-honoring and superior way. Now, we looked at a definition also for courtship, and we did modify it a little bit from what I had originally. But this is what I have now. See if this rings any bells in your memory. Courtship is a supervised, non-threatening, non-binding, exclusive consensual arrangement that allows an eligible young man and young woman and their families the opportunity to explore whether or not they would be a good match for marriage. We considered some of the advantages of courtship, and I'm not going to try to find them on the board. It might be a little bit too difficult, but you'll remember that last time we saw that courtship helps preserve purity. And that's very important. By the way, I'm trying to go through this really quickly because this is just review. Desires, as you know, when you're younger, young adults are stronger than in any other time in life, and so it creates greater temptation. And so courtship can help in that regard because with the dating method that's used today with young men and women basically going out with whomever it is they would like to go out with, unsupervised, and oftentimes the parents not even realizing what's going on, it creates a terrible temptation for our youth. Also, of course, it creates the temptation of forming a relationship apart from parental consent. And that's something that is essential. As a matter of fact, the definition of a marriage is not just a covenant of companionship, but it is a young man and young woman consenting to be husband and wife with parental consent. And without that parental consent, we saw in Scripture, there really isn't a biblical marriage. It also helps ensure marriage in the Lord, because, well, even young Christians can fall into the snare of, can we just finish the statement? Can fall into the snare of getting married to an unbeliever, and if you do the courtship method, the likelihood of that is far less. Jan, did you want to?
Does the definition also include ensuring that the young man and the young woman are prepared for marriage, that they have learned the skills, some of the skills anyway, to deal with conflict, to deal with forgiveness?
Are you talking about, is that what the courtship is for?
Yeah, during the courtship.
Certainly there wouldn't be anything to exclude that. As a matter of fact, I suppose you might say that preparation should be going on throughout their whole upbringing, and certainly courtship could be a time for that. I'm going to suggest as well that, let's say, at the end of the courtship, and they decide that they're compatible and the parents are in agreement and so forth, that there should be pre-engagement counseling that would even help refine that a little bit more. But before they get engaged, they ought to be prepared in every way, because the engagement is really not that preparatory time, but all of life is, and of course courtship and then the pre-courtship counseling should also be helpful. Okay. Let's see. It helps. Courtship also helps ensure compatibility. Again, it is a time of testing, a time to explore, a time to find out about one another, and so forth. It does have the advantage of added wisdom, the wisdom of parents, and we're going to see how that works in just a moment, as you have a more objective eye looking at the relationship and trying to determine whether it really is a good match. And then, like I said before, it honors biblical headship. Now, what I wanted to do at this point is begin to explore a couple of areas. The first one is how one enters into a courtship. How, in this kind of arrangement, do you actually even have the opportunity to do this? So let me go ahead and erase this from the board, and we'll start to brainstorm about what might be perhaps ideal, or maybe not even necessarily ideal, since there's nothing ideal in this world. What we might consider to be relatively, if we can use that term with ideal, I doubt it, but okay. What are some of the ways that a young man and a young woman might come to get to know each other, and what would be an appropriate way for them to do this before they would even consider, let's say, entering into a courtship? Kathy? Okay. That would be, if we can use again the term ideal. Church would be a wonderful way to do that. It's not, of course, infallible that you're going to have always converted young men and young women meeting one another in church, but church is certainly the best option. By the way, I do believe, just a personal example, as a warning, that my mother met my dad in church. I mean, they grew up together, but he was going to church, and because he was going to church, she felt, and so did her parents, that they could get married, but he ended up not being a believer. So, again, it helps if those who are involved in the courtship can tell the difference between them as much as is humanly possible. Still can, obviously, be unsuccessful in weeding out the unbeliever. Okay, so church is one place to meet. Where's another place you could possibly meet? Schools? That's right, and obviously we're not talking about elementary school. So why don't we'll put it up to this level, because I don't believe you ought to be having any kind of close relationships developing in high school. That's really way too early for this. You know, it works for the dating game if you want to run the risk of shipwrecking your life, but as far as courtship, it's not going to work out too well. Can you think of any other places, any other ideas where to meet an eligible person? Okay, clubs. We can. Okay, let's see. Clubs. Now we're talking about what kind of clubs would we referring to as far as?
English, right? Yes, society.
Okay.
Special interest.
Okay, let's use that last one. Special interest. Oops. Groups. I was going to suggest also along church, there's, I don't know if you know, oftentimes in presbytery and also within churches in general, they might have church-related functions that might pull in more people from around different places. There's actually a meeting or an activity, or what would you call it? I don't know if you call it a special interest group, but it's a church-related function. I forget the name of it, but what's that? Okay, there's conferences. There's Southern California. Let's just put that one as an example. But conferences, which is a church-related activity, and it's meant to draw single people together that they might meet others. Okay. Oh, there was a gal I think many of you know who found somebody online in some sort of a Christian, what you call Christian singles kind of a thing, which may not necessarily be the best idea, but I have seen some that have been developed along reform lines where they try to protect and shelter the people who are involved in it, and there's a screening process before they would be allowed to actually contact, let's say, the young lady who might be have her name and profile on that. I just recently saw that. There was an email sent out. So let's say that there are some things that can be done in that regard on the internet. But you really got to be careful with that. And this would be, of course, Christian. And there was one other that I thought was unusual, where a pastor sent out a letter and a picture of his daughter, and was sending this picture to other pastors and explaining who his daughter was and what she was like, and asking if there might be any eligible young men that would be recommended as possible suitors. So that was by way of letter.
Probably related just through friends.
Okay, friends. Yeah, you're right. I think Brenton met Sarah through friends. So that's again a social, sort of a social network. Any other possibilities you can think of offhand, PJ? Work. Okay. Certainly. Okay. So basically, there's various ways, and I suppose depending upon your circle of friends, depending upon where you work, if it happens to be for a Christian organization, or maybe it's not, but maybe there's Christians who are there. Different, church get-togethers, different societies. This, of course, you have to be very careful of. In college, you have to be careful too, whether it be a Christian college or a secular college. But you could still possibly meet somebody there. Ryan met Abby at, was it Lee College? Is that the one they're going to? Yeah. Okay, so a variety of ways, and with, of course, the expansion of all the, well, especially the internet and communications, it makes it quite easy to become acquainted with just about anybody anywhere in the world. So there are ways, of course, to meet. Let's see. Okay. Now let's consider once they've met that. I think what we want to aim for here is the idea of getting to know people in a public environment. That's one thing I think that's pretty important. It's sort of the first step towards courtship. Although there are some instances where you really don't have them getting to know one another in a public environment, such, well, I suppose friends would be the letter, this idea of the pastor sending out a letter regarding his daughter, or the internet. If it would be more like getting to know them as individuals via the internet. But in a lot of these circumstances, it's in a social group. So you get to know them, get to know a little bit about them, perhaps become friends, and get to know each other better in a group environment. That's probably the way it's going to happen in most instances. But there will be those where perhaps you're a little bit older. As in the case of the pastor sending the letter regarding his daughter, I think she might have been in her late 20s or early 30s. And others might seek that if when they get a little bit older and the Lord still hasn't brought that particular individual into their lives. But in most cases, it'll be more in a public environment. Okay, now if they let's see, if they become interested, let's say to the point where they might want to pursue courtship. Okay, what's the next step that they need to take? Kathy? Okay, contacting parents. Remember, we don't want any of this going on behind closed doors, and that's where having a good relationship, of course, with your children is very important, and hopefully our children will be open and honest with us and will express what's in their heart and won't try to do anything secretly because they're afraid that perhaps their parents won't approve of it. Okay, but parental consent is the next thing that is necessary. Okay, let me put this over here now, because how they meet is not quite as important as this particular step, as we're going to move into the courtship. But parental consent. Okay, now here we can begin to ask ourselves some questions. So what do you think would be necessary for a parent to give their consent to this? What do you think the parent ought to do? Jerry? Correct. Okay. So let's meet this person that you're talking about. Hopefully by this time they will know that individual as well. Okay, but yeah, they need to meet, and what are they going to do when they meet? Good. Okay.
Put them under a hot lamp.
That's right. So how do you spell interrogate? Okay, so spelled it wrong. Right, interrogate, or we might soften it to interview. I'm going to interview you. All right, so they want to meet this person, see what they're like, and by the way, is this something that who's meeting whom here? Who is meeting whom in this case?
Well, that was going to be maybe another step, but the parents of the two parties should meet.
Okay, so you interrogate each other? Okay, so we have here.
4 different lamps.
Okay, parents to parent, let's say, or okay, parents meet. But I was thinking more along the lines of, what do we usually think of when we think of this interrogation? Okay, right. So we have the well, let's see, we have the young woman's father, and he's interrogating the young man. Now, do you think that this should go the other way as well? It's something we don't often think about. I'm not talking about the young man interrogating the young woman's father, but what I mean is, should the young man's father interview the young lady? It'd be nice to know something about her too, wouldn't it? Okay. All right, so we're talking about getting to know them, meeting them, interviewing them, and so forth. And I know one person here at least who has a first-hand experience with that. And thankfully, Ruth was willing to submit to that, and because of that, things went very well. And there was a good match, and a good Christian marriage, and now a good, strong household in which to raise children. Right? But what are some of the things that you might want to ask of that individual after you put the lamp in their face and get them sweating a little bit? Now, what would you ask them? What kinds of questions? What would you like to know? Kathy?
First of all, you need to hear their profession of faith and see if they're really equally yoked.
Okay. Let's say in this case, whether it's the dad, well, let's just say the father of the young woman who is interviewing the young man. So checks his profession of faith. That is very important. Are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Well, then prove it. At least I think what you would want is something along the lines of a credible profession of faith. That is, they have sound doctrine, they're trusting in Christ, they have a life that, as far as you can tell, matches. Yes?
I would think along with that, and although it doesn't have to be in every little doctrine, but she would be concerned about those doctrines, even within the church at large, that might be divisive, so that they would not only have a profession of faith, but also similar views of Scripture,
Okay.
in which to raise children really be a life home, rather than how the children get raised.
Right. Actually, one of the things we're seeking for here is compatibility, right? So compatibility it has to be spread across all the different areas of life. So certainly there can't be compatibility if one is in the light and the other's in darkness, as far as in two different kingdoms. Plus the command of the Lord not to marry an unbeliever. So you want to settle this question. But as Donna was saying, even within Christendom, even within the church, there's a huge variety of beliefs. And the question is your belief compatible with what you know to be the truth? Or something in this case, are their beliefs going to be compatible? And I'm thinking, of course, let's say, you can run into a lot of different ones here as far as, say, the Arminian and Calvinism. That's a big difference. Or if it happens to be covenantal in view or dispensational, that's a big one. There you go. You've got the charismatic belief and cessation. Give my scribble. So yes, there's a number of things here. BJ?
And actually, I'm going to be very concrete and say what, along with, in terms of their beliefs, what is their belief about marriage in terms of, we could divide it into egalitarian and complementarian, but we're getting to the jargon for a second. Who's leading whom and how are they going to work out if they're, maybe that's the advanced part of the courtship rather than what we're getting, but I think it's germane to kind of how they do themselves. They may or may not have such a doctrine in place, but I think the other piece that goes through all of this is whether they're teachable, and then whether they would be willing to submit, even if they were shown to be wrong. So being teachable and being able to submit.
Okay. Good.
BJ's right. I'd broaden it out into relationships, of which the marriage relationship is one that the parent-child relationship is another. The work, the employer-employee relationship. Every testing a proper understanding of how to conduct oneself in each of those different situations.
Okay, so we would just call this relationships. And I suppose whether the person has a correct view on how to function, I guess we're looking at what the fifth commandment, whether he understands that properly, proper submission to authority, and also proper use of authority. Yeah. Okay. Why don't we just put maybe this fifth commandment here to remind us of that particular aspect. Are you going to be a good employee? Are you going to be a good husband? Yeah. And are you going to submit also to parental authority? Yeah.
Church relationships.
That's right. Okay. So we'll put this, let's see, it would be, I guess it would be church, family, and state, although I guess, where do you, I haven't thought about, where do you put employer-employee relationships? I guess it's another sphere, but maybe these three spheres aren't sufficient. Okay, anything else you'd want to find out? Kathy?
Several things come to mind, and I'm not sure that these are necessarily in order of importance, but two things in particular. Maturity. Are you mature enough to undertake a marriage commitment? And the other thing would be, can you support a family?
Very good. Okay, so that, let's say, ability to support or ability to provide. Greg?
Again, I would look at the whole heading of finances. How does the person plan to manage household finances? How do they see their accountability as a steward under God? Really, it's not too hard to figure out all the things that can cause strain on relationships, and those are the things to test to see where the compatibility is. Are the things where you know that if one parent has a very well-developed idea of disciplining a child and the other one has no idea at all, that's going to be a terrible thing. The different doctrines in the church, different ideas about finances, tithing or not tithing.
Looks like we can really expand this one too. Under family relationships, I suppose you would include the idea of disciplining and so forth. There really are. I mean, the size of the family. There's so many different things that need to be discussed. When you get on the dating model, what is the criteria that one usually looks at as far as whether a person is suitable?
You mean between the two people?
Yeah. Well, usually, I mean, in today's society, what is it that people are looking at? I like the way you look, you know. Yeah, but we see we're looking at this. This is really where they're going to have to live, though, you know. You may like the way a person looks, but they may be a total opposite as far as what you need and what you should be looking for. So looks are not unimportant, but they are not primary. Okay, the character of an individual, yes.
There's another caution in it. BJ already brought it up, but just as when you're interviewing somebody for church membership, you don't expect a seminary level knowledge of doctrine and ability to be eloquent in expressing some of the deep truths of Scripture, but you look for a genuine understanding. In all of these areas, given that these are young people, you have to set your expectations accordingly and test for that willingness to learn, that humility, that teachable spirit. Because in 20 years' time, they won't be the same people they are today.
Hopefully better. Yes, the maturity, that is something that can be could be difficult. Is you might be expecting something more along the lines of what you've obtained at 50 years of age, and someone who's 20, and it's not going to happen. So you do want a maturity that is consistent with their age.
I was just going to dovetail on that because, they have to be able to be teachable because if, they're obviously going to run into problems. Every couple does. And to be able to talk even to, their parents or in-laws and discuss, or, mother-in-law or whatever, discuss the problem and hopefully work on a solution is valuable.
Okay, so you're saying that are you talking about their teachability or approachability, or?
Well, I guess both teachability and approachability.
Okay. I guess that also, yeah. I suppose there's different ways to categorize these things too.
With leadership, they're under some of those authority there as far as, not leading.
Marriage and headship.
Oh, I suppose. And this could be more than just doctrine, what one believes, but I guess here we're talking about not only do they have a correct belief, but they're willing to, or they have, an obvious ability to do that, some maturity in that area. So let's move this from doctrine to, of course, there would have to be a way that they could express that, not being yet in a position of authority. So it would have to be a way to measure that. But to see if they have that potential, I guess, would be the best way to do that. Do you think it's important, maybe not absolutely essential, but would it be important to see what their educational background is? Is it possible that they might be incompatible if they're not, let's say, somewhat equally educated? Just a lot of these things can, any of these things could cause potential difficulties if they're not compatible in that area. There are some people who may actually, let's say, some men who may prefer a wife who isn't educated, and there may be some that would prefer those that are. So those things just have to they have to be explored.
I'm thinking as well in terms of not just profession of faith, where you look for a walk as well as the right words. Getting to know the life story might help to reveal certain character traits or behaviors or so on that can expose things dig into the deeper.
How about background? Oh, I think, finding out what they're all about, where they've come from, where they're going. By the way, there's another one that occurred to me. See what you think if this is important. But it would be their emotional makeup or emotional stability. Just because a person is a Christian doesn't mean that they're necessarily not going to have some kind of issues, right? Are we looking for the perfect person here? We're looking for, as close as we can get to it.
Perfect for the parent or perfect for the spouse?
We want a perfect spouse for our very imperfect children. Well, what we want, of course, is we realize no one's going to be perfect, but we do want to get the best match that we possibly can. Are there any other things we want to add to this? Oh, there was one other one I guess I had on my list. Can you think of, yes?
I don't know if this is always true, but I'm thinking, are they matched as far as their gifts and talents? I mean, are they going the direction in addition to that? I mean, is the gift that the young lady has, is she going to be able to support her husband in whatever his calling is going to be? So are they compatible with that?
Okay. Why don't we just put here calling, and then the question would be whether or not the young lady would be able to support that particular call. And I know we ran into a situation where Donna was able to talk to a young lady who was very much interested in, well, had a relationship with this young man on campus, and he was heading towards politics. And that was not what was in her heart at all. Were they engaged, by the way?
No, they were not.
Oh, that's good. So they never got engaged. That's good. And when she realized that really wasn't what was in her heart to do, she was able to break away from that particular gentleman, and the Lord introduced her to a man who was involved in everything that she really loved. They got married, and they've been happily married now for probably a couple decades or more. Yes, Jerry?
Something that just occurred to me that's rather important is health.
Health, that's right. Certainly want to know if there's any health issues that they might be aware of. And things like that should, of course, be disclosed if you're aware of something that that isn't some sort of problem, physical problem or emotional problem, things of that nature. Okay, anything else you can think of? Jan?
And what about expectations or assumptions, or because oftentimes those are issues?
Yeah, that why don't we go ahead? We'll go ahead and make another category for that. We talked about relationships and we talked about headship, but there could be expectations in other areas, right? Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think you would have in some marriage counseling, they would say, where do you squeeze the toothpaste to? Which way do you like your toilet paper hung on the spindle? Is it with it rolling from the top or the bottom? That kind of thing. Let's see. What do we call that again?
Expectations.
Oh, okay, it's expectations and just what we call idiosyncrasies. Yes, but expectations would be a very good idea of what is expected of one another, even beyond perhaps what the Bible may designate. I mean, for instance, the gal might say, "Well, I like everything to be in order, and I like it. I don't like anything left undone. It's all got to be in order, and it's always got to be that way," kind of thing. And if she marries somebody who doesn't have that kind of mindset or ability, they can really drive each other crazy. So that would be something to think about. Okay. But I mean, I'm sorry, Jan. Go ahead.
Well, it's also that opportunity to teach and to bring them back to having similar expectations or realistic expectations.
Right.
As opposed to
Right. That would be good. As a matter of fact, a lot of these potential problems that could arise, I mean, some of these you can't do much about, like emotional stability, calling, health, and so forth. But under expectations or education or certain types of things here, you might be able to head off a lot of difficulties. If the person comes to realization at the outset that, I can't really expect the person to be this way, that's not what the Lord necessarily calls them to be. And if they're aware of that ahead of time and they're prepared, and they go into the relationship, if they weren't prepared, then these things will just become irritants, and they'll fester and eventually become, perhaps bitterness or explosive anger or something like that. But some of these things could be, again, if you're prepared for it and you can live with that difference, considering everything else that perhaps comes into the mix. I'm thinking now about the couple, and also the parent has to provide the counseling for the children. Some of these things might possibly be overcome and prepared for. Donna?
This would probably fit more under background
Okay, cultural differences, that's true. If you have somebody from America marrying somebody from China, or if we had, what's that, or England? True. And then we have, remember the couple that we had visiting for a while, Delitzo and Sharonda. I mean, she's from America and he's from Africa. I mean, you've got two different cultures. So cultural background, I think, under background, that could be, we can conceive that in different ways. A background could be a person's particular upbringing and experiences. In this case, culture is also part of that background. So cultural differences. Yeah. There can be quite a bit of difference. Even the idea, well, of course, under cultural differences, you can also have different ideas of how a family is supposed to function. Yes.
The other thing to note here, I think, is that the whole courtship process is a continuing interview. If you get to, doing all of this could take a long, long time, and then the courtship wouldn't start. But you shouldn't get to you shouldn't come away with the idea once you've gone through this list and checked it all off. Okay, that's it. Now the courtship's underway, and I can't
ask any more problems. Any questions?
You can't put your foot on the brake. Or a lot of what you do in the courtship is observing and getting confirmation that everything that's been discussed at this point in time checks out.
Okay, with that in view, let's say the interview continues through the courtship. With that in view, though, there are some things that you would want to find out before you would give your consent. So maybe it would be, we're right at 45 minutes right now, so we don't want to spend much more time, but maybe we could end by just marking out those that would be wise to know at the outset. I think this would be absolutely essential. This you're going to find out more along the lines, but maybe just a cursory at least. Just, I'm not going to give my consent to this. Okay, and we do want to find, I think, something about maturity, don't we? As far as whether they're teachable. Yeah. Now this of course we can find out. Now, one of the things, it's important. This is kind of, I hope this wouldn't be called a catch-22, but the idea is that you want to be careful as far as a parent giving your consent to someone who could potentially be dangerous to your say your daughter or your son. In this case, if you happen to be the one interviewing, let's say, the young lady, because we're talking about going both ways here. Because once they get into a courtship, there's going to be the tendency for hearts to become warm with affections toward one another. There's already some of that going on that makes them want to enter into a courtship to begin with. But once they're officially in a courtship, the potential for their hearts to become intertwined becomes greater. So there are certain things you're going to want to pay attention to so that they don't get enamored and what's the word I'm looking for? They just they don't get to a point where they give their heart over to someone who is not really a good match. And especially on these levels, of course, with regard to profession of faith and doctrine. Okay, so do you see any others that you might want to mark off as far as what you would want to learn before we set out in that direction? There may be, of course, throughout all this process of learning about one another, the young man, the young woman might say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what I want, and if we can't see eye to eye on this, it's just not going to work. So that's good too. Hopefully they'll be thinking along those lines. And
realistic ability to provide. I mean, if the person is not in a position to financially run a household.
How are you going to take care of my daughter? That's right. Planning on living on the streets? Planning on living with your parents? Don't plan on that. No, you've got to provide. Okay. All right. Oh yes, Jerry.
Just an idea. I don't know if it's establishing guidelines early on to see how they fare with time. It's kind of a gauge on progress.
Okay. Well, I mean, the guidelines themselves aren't. We're gonna talk about guidelines for courtship, but the fact that they're willing to submit to it, right? Says
Like a structure, you can figure out 1 day a week. If I want her back by a certain time, be totally, forsake all that. That's a strong indication.
good. That probably falls under maturity, but yes, the willingness, let's say submission or submissive. Submissive to the rules or the boundaries, okay, of the courtship. Oops. Sometimes the hand doesn't do what the mind is telling it to do. Okay. All right. Yes, Greg.
Just one closing point. It looks rather daunting, and I can imagine that young women may be rather anxious, but the young man with whom they're thinking of entering into courtship has got to go through all of this in order to achieve that status. But actually what you find out, if they're not willing to go through all of this, then obviously they don't really care that much for the young woman.
Okay.
So you find out pretty quickly the level of care and concern that there is.
That's right. Are they willing to go through the process? And really, I mean, can you think of anything on this list that you wouldn't want to know? And as far as our young people here that one day hope to get married, I mean, would you want to marry somebody not knowing where they stand on these issues and what they're like in these areas? But again, it helps to have an objective view of a parent that can see things that perhaps you can't see and pick up on things that maybe you won't pick up on, and perhaps you'll pick up on things that they don't see. But you want to know all of these things before you get married, and the parent certainly wants to know before the father can give his consent. Okay, are there any other comments at this point? Yes, Donna?
Well, I was just thinking that it would really be helpful even if the young people, well, particularly if they knew themselves on each of these areas, what are they really looking for? What do they really want and what do they believe they can live with? And so I'm assuming then that there would be not only the interview of, the father of the young lady, of the young man, but also a lot of discussion going on within each household itself.
That's a good point. So after the young woman's father interviews the young man, then he's going to want to talk to the young lady. And he's going to want to do this in advance too. And we're talking about, hopefully our children by this time will have picked up on a few of these things and know that what they're looking for and what will make a good match for them. And they're not just willing to take anything that happens to look good. Yes. Okay. If there aren't any other comments, let's just close with a word of prayer, and we'll pick up next time on how to conduct a courtship. What would be some of the parameters that we're going to want to look at? But don't let this again be too daunting. These are things that you would probably find out anyway, for the most part. Although some of them you might not think about, but there are things that you would be concerned about. I think whether you're the young person entering into this relationship or looking at a person as a prospective husband or wife, or whether you're the parent, you would be concerned about all of these things. All right, well, let's have a word of prayer.